Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Rowe.
And I'm Nique,
and welcome to The Invisible Men, where we make the achievements of incredible men invisible no more. Hello, my name is Ian Rowe. I'm a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
Hello, I'm Nique. I'm a member of the Leadership Network at AEI.
And welcome to our latest episode of The Invisible Men, where Nique and I have the incredible opportunity to speak to unbelievable men who you may not know, but are doing amazing things. And our goal is to make these men invisible no more. And today we have a great opportunity to sit with Vernon Lee, who is a managing director at the Marathon Fund, who's been doing some extraordinary things over the years. Welcome, Vernon. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, excellent. So Vernon, tell us a little bit about what the Marathon Fund is, and then also just give us a little bit of your story. How is it that you got to be where you are? And I love that you got Howard in the frame, so that's got to be part of the story too.
Bison for life. Yeah, it's definitely part of the journey. I appreciate you guys having me on and thinking enough of me to fit within the, high aspiration and some of the accomplishments of some of your other guests. So I don't take that lightly. But the Marathon Fund is an early stage fund, pre-seed, seed, pre-series A, focused specifically on underrepresented entrepreneurs. So we're very deliberate and intentional about investing in Black, Latino, disabled, LGBTQ, and veteran entrepreneurs. Our primary hunting ground is the DC, Maryland, Virginia region of Mid-Atlantic, but we will be doing deals and with our colleagues and peers in other regions in Chicago, Atlanta, South Florida, the Bay Area, LA, and wherever there's some great founders that have an opportunity or deserving of opportunity, particularly in the venture space, early stage, for early stage funding. Check sizes will be in a sort of 250-ish range, but we are looking for high growth, exceptional founders. I've had the opportunity to work with Nique side by side, so we're looking for Qs that can, take a company and really, really grow it in a significant way. You hear a lot about sort of social impact. I mean, our perspective is, well, there's a social aspect to this. It's about returns. There's an opportunity for amazing founders that need that first check to come in that would then, move on to a Series A. So we want to be able to provide the coaching, mentor, in addition to the capital aspect for those founders that have that type of vision and an ability to execute. And then from there, creating an amount of wealth for their employees and for that trickle down opportunity. So that's how we look at it from a return standpoint. We will get that social impact from that perspective.
So the Milton Friedman philosophy, where the social responsibility of business is to generate profit. Someone
here is definitely well read.
So in your own life, have you had the entrepreneurial bug? Like how is it that you are looking to sort of stimulate this in others? Was it birthed within you at some point?
Yeah, so great question. So in your earlier question about sort of my path, so my first entrepreneurial type endeavor was being a paper boy. A buddy of mine had a paper route. He said, hey, let's, split, some of the route and some of the money. Then I ended up getting some of my own little area. So that was sort of my first entrepreneurial type effort, middle school. But it really took place. And I was born and raised in Hampton, Virginia, but I always wanted to fly jets. So Langley Air Force Base, Air Combat Command is located in Hampton. My grandfather was in the Air Force. It was just something at the time when I was 9 years old, I always wanted to fly jets. But in high school, I ended up having to get glasses. And so I wasn't able to even compete for a pilot slot once I went to Air Force RTC, and forget about even going to the Air Force Academy. So really, for me, it came down to sort of Howard, UVA, North Carolina, A&T, interesting enough for decisions. I thought being in DC would be an awesome opportunity from an exposure standpoint. Went to Howard, Air Force RTC. But while I was at Howard, one of my classmates used to throw some of the best parties in the entire city. Not just at Howard, I'm talking about the entire city. He was a freshman I'm like, who is this guy? But everybody knew him. So he actually inspired me to want to be a party promoter back in Hampton between my sophomore and junior year. So that classmate was Sean Puffy Combs.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so we know
who I worked with many years ago, by the way, on the vote.
Is that right? Really?
During my MTV days, yes.
Oh,
but that's when I was cool. That's when I was cool.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, but no, it was just interesting that I'm like, man, this guy's doing some of the best parties. So I went home after the summer of my freshman year, worked. It was, you're sort of in this in between. Again, this is some market analysis where you're not in high school anymore, but you're not 21 to get in the club. So I saw market opportunities. So the next summer, me and two of my cousins started promoting parties. Our company was Grassroots Promotions, and we rented out an old skating rink, and we had tremendous success. Then we started doing some mini concerts. We had Queen Latifah and Chubb Rock. One of my cousins went to Norfolk State. So when I went back to Howard, I started doing parties at a place called Chapter 3 in DC. So this entrepreneurial effort really kicked in when I was at Howard. And I wasn't able to sustain it because I was on the Air Force ROTC scholarship. So I owed 4 years to the U.S. Air Force. So I subsequently went on active duty and was an officer, which was the best thing that I really enjoyed the opportunity that I had as an Air Force officer.
Wow. There's a study that just came out, well, maybe about a year ago at this point, and it studied the success of Black men in America. And it really, because most people, when you're speaking about Black men, you normally talk about prison reform and, non-marital birth rates, but there's a surprisingly high number of Black men that have been successful. And this study tried to sort of isolate what were the factors that led these men to be successful. And generally, the factors were they had followed something called the success sequence, which is that they finished their education, full-time work, marriage, then children. But there were also two other elements. There's often a military component and a faith commitment, which I've always found that very fascinating. Sounds like
that is very fascinating. Because I pretty much hit all of those factors. Growing up in Virginia, faith was very important. My family, it was, Southern Baptist. We're in church like all day on Sunday. It was not exactly fun, but it was what was expected.
It's what was expected. Hear that?
Yeah, it was. This is what you will do this. It really wasn't much of an option. And so that's interesting about the faith and military. I just come from a military family, so I was always exposed to it. My mother was a captain, Army captain.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine a Black woman during those times in the Army, but I had an uncle who was in the Navy. My other grandfather was in the Army for a couple of years. So I've sort of always been exposed to that. The other thing that is essentially you talk about sort of these success factors. Again, for me, it's just weird. When I was 9 years old, I just had this vision that, again, I wanted to fly jets. I was going to get into politics for some reason. I was always going to be a business owner. Like I honestly can't explain why at that age these things came to me, and it was just very clear. I say God had to have implanted something. Like I actually never doubted whether I was going to be successful, which is, I know sounds strange, but I didn't achieve academically in high school because, and this is particularly, I think, for the audience, and I try to share this with a lot of young men especially, but I was embarrassed that I spoke so intelligently. I was teased for using big words. I was in advanced classes, it was usually me and maybe one other brother or one other sister, and everybody else was white in those classes. But I was on the football team. I wrestled, but none of my boys were. None of the fellas were in those classes. So I underachieved academically in high school.
How did you balance that?
My mother, thank God for mothers. my family's expectation of me was high, even though I wasn't necessarily meeting those expectations. And it actually got to a point, my mother and father divorced when I was 8. And my father was around, but ultimately got to a point in high school, my mother was like, you're going to have to go stay with your father. And so his expectation, like, it was like, oh, I got to really step this thing up. But still, I underachieved in high school. I understood the content, but I only did just enough to get by, and was lazy in some aspects. But and the reason I tell it because I do a lot of mentoring as well, is I don't want other Black boys to be embarrassed about being intelligent and speaking whatever their truths are. And that was something that I could have easily ended up in a whole different path with some of the fellas I was hanging with. But I would say football also was very important for me. At the high school I went to, we were nationally ranked, very competitive, multiple state championships. So I've always chased excellence. I've always had a hunger for what excellence looks like. It feels like, and I felt being exposed to that level of hard work and dedication by the entire year to achieve a goal, and then achieving that was I'm still friends with some of my high school football coaches, but I tell them I thank them because it was hard. I mean, it was very, very difficult, as you can imagine. But learning teamwork and dedicating yourself to a goal was something that really was significant for me.
Vern, one of the things you said about not wanting to sound white and use big words and not be too successful academically, a book I'm reading now, which is titled Black Rednecks and White Liberals. One of the fundamental themes of the book is that those cultural sensibilities of being cool, a heavy focus on respect, maybe quick to violence, maybe some lax sexual norms, which we equate with urban America. In fact, those things come from the Scottish Highlands and Northern Britain. And the point is that those behaviors were actually brought over to the South specifically, and were white Southern behaviors that we adopted during our enslavement. That this idea of sort of Black culture is in fact from Scotland, which was incredibly underdeveloped, and Northern and Western Britain. In fact, in the book, they detail that Ebonics, and we always hear about Ebonics, and it's important to give our children. It comes from there. It has nothing to do with Africa. Really? And so a big chunk of the book just talks about when you could separate us from that culture, we performed historically and present day so much better. But the thing that really opened my eyes is that we view this culture as ours, and in fact, it's the farthest thing from being ours.
That's interesting. I've definitely got to read that book.
I mean, one of the things, Vernon, that your focus on entrepreneurship and in your own life and now helping to stimulate others, it is an exciting time, it seems. I've heard about Harlem Capital, which you might be familiar with, which is a new enterprise started by 2 Black Harvard Business School alum who have made the commitment to, I think, recruit 1,000 new business leaders, minority and women leaders. I just saw that Magic Johnson is committing $100 million to invest in small businesses. Netflix is allocating $100 million of its capital and transferring that to Black-owned financial institutions. So it seems like there are a lot more opportunities from an entrepreneurship perspective that are being created for more Black-owned businesses. How do we get more of the pipeline? Or is the pipeline already there and this new capital is just finally catching up? Or do we need to do more work to cultivate more of this idea of small business expansion and creation in our community?
I love the way you framed that. So there is amazing talent that already exists. There are some amazing businesses, and oftentimes we need to differentiate between not all small businesses require capital. I mean, like a huge amount of capital. So separate sort of that group, but there are those that are a little bit more capital intensive and require a little bit more runway to be able to execute on a minimum viable product, make sure you got the proper product fit. So I think it's there's amazing talent right now, and I think there's some really fundable companies now. I think we need to keep pushing the pipeline. There's still, there's a lot of accelerate. We talk about the capital commitments here, but there's some amazing incubators and accelerators that are out there. But we need more of that. Whatever the mechanism for the entrepreneurship development and training, we need more of that, because there are different type of entrepreneurs. Again, they're small business owners. They're not entrepreneurs that, what I'm describing as scale, they could really scale up. Now, the biggest challenge that we have, when I say we, meaning Black entrepreneurs in particular, is that Black entrepreneurs need an opportunity to fail. And that doesn't exist systematically. If a Black entrepreneur fails, it's very likely they won't get another shot at an opportunity. Whereas, white entrepreneurs fail and could get back.
They learn so much from their initial.
Yeah, exactly. They've learned
learning opportunities.
They brought through millions of dollars, but they were able to build something that they could extract. And again, it is what it is. There's no disputing this. And so again, I don't want to. I'm not suggesting that, hey, Black entrepreneurs are going to fit, but that's the reality. The numbers and the statistics just show it is very hard to build a business. So we need to have opportunities to fail and then come back and be even better the second time around with whatever that new product or whatever that solution that's being proposed, or the problem that's being solved by the entrepreneur.
Vern, we have a section of the podcast that we call the speed round, where we throw out individuals or philosophies or functions, and we ask you to kind of pick one and give us the reason why. So we'll start with one that's consistent with what we just were discussing. Corporate executive or entrepreneur?
Oh, entrepreneur. And again, amazing respect for on the corporate side. I think that's needed. But in terms of growing job creation, wealth creation, entrepreneurship for me.
One more softball then, given where I think you're coming from. Civil rights or economic development?
Oh, economic development. And some will argue that economic development is part of civil rights. I think there's some legislative things and rights that need to happen from a civil perspective, but pure economic development and capital infusion, I'm all economic development.
And then, of course, we've got to ask you, Martin or Malcolm?
Malcolm. Amazing respect for Martin. I think they were both needed. I think very effective in their own ways. But Malcolm, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was at Howard, it just changed my life. And the reason I mentioned our promotion company, my two cousins, Grassroots Productions, it was named after the grassroots speech by Malcolm X. And if you've not heard that speech, the grassroots speech by Malcolm, is just, so I'm Malcolm easily.
So I have to tell you, you're our first guest to pick Malcolm, and I love it. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That was not even close for me.
The last one is Jay-Z or Kanye?
Oh, this Jay-Z. That's not even. Although I guess some people might have some questions, some decisions, Jay-Z, but no, just in terms of as an artist, Jay-Z, and some of the entrepreneurial things that Jay-Z has done that's the easy one for me.
I love your focus on economic development. There's a lot of discussion right now about the racial wealth gap in the United States, that the average Black family only has about 1/10 the net worth of the average white family. If you only look at race, if you start to look at education, family structure, those gaps go away. But there's a raging debate right now. And even with a new administration coming in, there are people who are theorizing that the gap in wealth is so big between Blacks and whites that there's, quote, nothing a Black person can do individually to close that gap. And so therefore reparations is the only answer. And I'm just curious what your response is, because there are a lot of folks that think that, reparations that's the way that's the only way in which Black people can become economically successful in the United States.
First of all, I'm all for reparations, period. Like, let me quickly say that how it gets formed and determined and all that, I don't have a position on that per se. I don't think it's the only way, but again, just looking at the facts, after slavery, we were given nothing to start, right? Former slave owners are actually given reparations because this resource they no longer had. So they were actually given reparations, whereas those individuals had nothing to start. So from the very beginning, we're a couple hundred years into this significant marathon, and the lack of investment that has taken place in for African American, whether you're entrepreneur or otherwise, in the training that would normally go, has not existed. And we know very much housing discrimination and the lack of wealth creation from home ownership. These things are all documented with redlining and so on and so forth. So it's this combination of systematic lack of economic opportunity and investment in the descendant of slaves has been, it's a tragedy. And but how do we fix it? I think reparations.
That's the question. I think that's the question, right?
Yeah. So the reparations, absolutely. When you think about, and again, putting some things in context, I know we're in a global pandemic, and there were some decisions needed to be made, but it's amazing how $2-3 trillion can be created within a couple of weeks, because now you're investing in you're investing in a level of economics to try and stabilize the economy. Whereas I look at the fact that if you look at reparations and you invest in these, the number of individuals, whether that's through education, whether that's through capital, there's an opportunity now to build from that, which means more tides can rise. So, whatever the debate is around reparations and those things, I think it needs to happen. I think whatever the commission, I guess, is being considered, I think that should have a high level of priority. But I think at the same time, the commitment by some of the corporate entities that you mentioned, Netflix, PayPal's committed $500,000, SoftBank's committed $100 million. The list goes on. Citibank's committed $1 billion, and actually, Citi's did a really unique study around if X amount of capital had been provided to Black entrepreneurs, it would have increased the economy $1 trillion. There was a definite correlation that's associated with that. So at least on a corporate
done similar, yeah.
So I think the commitments on the corporate side also, from the private sector, I think also is also going to be a key to that as well.
And what do you think of? Because one of the concerns with and we're going to want you to give advice to our young man Darryl, our 16-year-old Black kid from from forgotten USA. What's the message to Darryl, though, in terms of the factors he can control around how he's going to generate economic wealth in his own lifetime? What's the best advice to him to make that happen? Is it waiting for reparation? Is it hoping that a government program like that will come through, or is it something more that he has influence over his destiny?
Well, Darryl and all of the Darryls that are out there in communities that have failed them and are areas that are struggling, you should know first and foremost that you're not alone, that we're here, there's other men and women that want to support you. So no matter what your circumstances are, and some of the lonely nights and times, debating on whether to stay in school or not, you're not alone. There are opportunities for you to create wealth. The education aspect is absolutely paramount. So no matter what those challenges, no matter what those distractions are, get your education, because that will be your path. As you're doing that and pursuing that, we're now in a sort of Renaissance type area or period in which entrepreneurship can come from many facets. So whether you're in high school or college, don't be bound by any sort of mental block on whether you want, if it's something you can achieve. There's an amazing number of resources and mentorship opportunities. So talk to your teachers and deacons at your church or whatever religious affiliation, but seek out those individuals who certainly want to help and be a mentor. Because the more coaches and mentors you have, which made a huge difference in my life, there are people that really, really want to help and guide you so that you can minimize any mistakes and bad decisions that you make in your life.
Wow. Well, Vernon, thank you very much. I know Darryl and all the Darryls of the world would love to follow your model. And I find it fascinating that it was Puffy Combs who provided your initial inspiration that sparked your entrepreneurial flame. And so that's what we're trying to do with this Invisible Men series, is to, who knows what it's going to be, to catalyze some young listener to say, you know what? I could do that too. I can build a business. I can raise capital. I can become an entrepreneur. So thank you for being a great model. And thank you all for listening to this latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe.
Vern, thanks so much. That was wonderful, and appreciate you giving us the time.
Absolutely. It was so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching another episode of The Invisible Men. You can find other episodes at the AEI podcast channel on YouTube or the website invisible.men, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.